The extreme thermal gradient of the outdoor perimeter provided an optimal sensory environment. The freezing -15-degree Manitoba wind whipped fiercely across the surface of the steaming water, creating a dense, opaque layer of atmospheric condensation against the heavy glass doors of the aquatic center. Kiera sat submerged to her clavicles, the secure fabric of her aquatic uniform regulating her core temperature. Her round hazel eyes were gently closed, and her breathing was firmly locked into a mathematically perfect rhythm. The heavy structural load of her recent hospital telemetry, combined with the lingering trauma loops of the catastrophic chemical breach, were actively being overwritten by the localized heat. She felt completely stabilized in this isolated operational zone. I sometimes calculate that seagulls engage in deliberate exhibitionism, Kiera stated softly, the acoustic isolation of the bubbling jets providing a highly secure channel for her vocal output. I believe they like to show off. Hearing the melodic precision of her voice, Jessie immediately shifted his visual focus away from the frosted glass and the hostile variable lurking inside the facility. The sudden, suffocating panic that had gripped his chest merely seconds ago dissolved instantly upon receiving her auditory input. Looking at Kiera's relaxed facial geometry, illuminated by the low-voltage ambient lighting of the resort, he completely forgot about Marco's unauthorized presence. His internal threat detection grid powered down, superseded by a profound, grounding wave of affection for the woman beside him. "How so?" Jessie asked, his vocal cadence dropping seamlessly into the measured, dependable rhythm she required to maintain her environmental baseline. Kiera kept her eyes closed, processing the aerodynamic data in her mind with focused clarity. Have you ever observed their specific flight protocols? When they desire vertical elevation, they simply straighten out their wings and lock their physical structure into an unyielding position. They utilize invisible thermal updrafts to rise effortlessly into the air. Conversely, the median population of other avian species are required to execute continuous mechanical flapping, or they must run rapidly along a solid surface and flap simultaneously to achieve similar verticality. Seagulls simply glide upward, demonstrating superior kinetic efficiency and what I categorize as showing off. Your analytical thoughts are always highly interesting, Jessie said, a warm, genuine smile lifting the corners of his mouth. Your perspective on biological variables is exceptionally precise. He allowed himself a deep, regulating breath before turning his head back toward the heavy glass doors. Through the streaked condensation, he could clearly monitor the indoor aquatic sector. Marco was currently attempting to navigate the overhead metal monkey bars spanning the synthetic floating islands. He was a skinny man whose hair had been aggressively bleached and dyed in a chaotic leopard-colored pattern. Marco's kinetic movements were wildly uncalibrated and deliberately exaggerated, obviously engineered to attract the visual attention of the single and non-single women gathered near the shallow perimeter. Jessie observed the clumsy display with a profound sense of emotional detachment. Long before the ultimate betrayal with Darcy had ruptured his previous operational grid, Jessie had actually classified Marco as a trusted friend. However, that social integration had steadily degraded over time. Jessie had simply grown bored of Marco's exhausting antics, weary of his constant, performative need to secure validation from the median population. The friendship had been in terminal decline before Marco became a catastrophic hostile variable. "Kiera," Jessie initiated, keeping his tone carefully neutral so as not to spike her sensory parameters. "Have you ever possessed a friendship variable that you had to delete because you simply became bored of their continuous behavioral antics?" Kiera tilted her head slightly, maintaining her closed-eye resting state as she queried her historical data archives. My grandmother frequently hypothesized that I required more female interaction to balance my social development. This was an illogical assumption, given that I was raised in an environment consisting almost entirely of my brother and my male cousins. However, to satisfy her parameters, I did attempt a social integration. I had a toxic friend. Her name was Ariana. What were the specific operational failures of that relationship? Jessie asked, tracking Marco as the skinny man lost his grip and plummeted into the chlorinated water with a highly inefficient splash. She was significantly more childish than my baseline allowed, Kira explained, her brow furrowing slightly at the memory of the friction. Ariana would frequently generate illogical jokes at the expense of other individuals. Her emotional output was entirely unregulated. For example, when one of her primary boyfriends was scheduled to attend an external work experience module while she was confined to a standard academic class, she found the schedule discrepancy unacceptable. She would initiate persistent whining protocols about his absence. It was a severe friction point on my nervous system. She would just get on my nerves with the whining about it. Opening her round hazel eyes, Kira turned her head to establish visual contact with Jessie. She immediately noticed that his ocular focus was fixed intently on the indoor facility rather than on her. She traced his line of sight through the atmospheric fog on the glass pane. Her gaze landed on the skinny man with the leopard-colored hair, who was now hauling himself clumsily back onto a foam island, looking around to verify if anyone had witnessed his kinetic failure. "Are you in possession of prior data regarding that individual?" Kira asked, her voice maintaining its clinical precision. "You know him." A sudden tightness gripped Jessie's jaw. A low, barely audible sound vibrated in the back of his throat. "He is Marco," Jessie stated with a slight growl, the raw data briefly compressing his syntax. "The specific variable who Darcy cheated on me with. He is a child." Kira processed this new information, analyzing Marco's erratic splashing and desperate posturing through the rigorous lens of Jessie's historical trauma. She felt her internal threat detection grid recalibrate to account for the proximity of a known hostile entity. "I already process a negative assessment of him," Kira stated firmly. "His kinetic behavior and visual presentation exactly mirror that of a child. As you are aware from my operational manual, I am highly nervous around unregulated children." Jessie shifted his physical coordinates in the water, moving closer to intercept any potential line of sight from the indoor sector. He squared his shoulders, locking himself into the unyielding foundation she relied upon to navigate an unpredictable world. "I will maintain an absolute firewall," Jessie promised, his brown eyes fiercely protective. "I will keep him away from you." Kira reached out under the steaming water, her fingers wrapping securely around his wrist to apply steady, grounding pressure. She looked directly into his eyes, overriding his defensive perimeter with a collaborative algorithm. "Negative. We will execute an avoidance protocol together. We will stay away from him together." The absolute certainty in her plural pronoun instantly stabilized Jessie's remaining anxiety. He exhaled a long, measured breath, the tension leaving his muscles as he leaned back against the stone edge of the tub. Marco was a deleted variable, isolated behind the glass, entirely irrelevant to their current coordinates. Secure in their shared parameters, Jessie and Kira relaxed back into the thermal gradient, intentionally setting their minds free to focus entirely on the aerodynamic superiority of seagulls. The heavy glass door separating the aquatic center from the freezing Manitoba night groaned open on its frosted hinges, admitting a localized blast of sub-zero wind. A new couple hurried out of the illuminated indoor facility, shivering violently as they rapidly descended the stone steps into the superheated outdoor hot tub. The churning water rippled outward, displacing the dense atmospheric condensation that hovered heavily over the surface. Jessie kept his physical coordinates locked firmly beside Kira, serving as a reliable thermal and emotional anchor against the concrete perimeter. The extreme temperature gradient created a natural sensory isolation zone, muffling the chaotic splashing from the interior pool and reducing the immediate environment to the rhythmic, predictable bubbling of the submerged hydrotherapy jets. Jessie shifted his posture, ensuring his shoulder maintained continuous, grounding contact with hers. He turned his head, his brown eyes focusing entirely on her relaxed facial geometry. If you were granted the administrative authority to establish one optimal variable for your upcoming birthday celebration, what specific environmental alteration would you select? He asked, his voice effortlessly adopting the measured, structural cadence she required for safe auditory processing. It was a linguistic algorithm built entirely out of deep, protective affection. Kira processed the hypothetical parameter, her round hazel eyes tracking a plume of steam as it vanished into the dark sky. I would mandate a permanent repositioning of the chronological placement of my birth date into the summer solstice quadrant, she stated smoothly. The current winter environment severely degrades my epidermal hydration levels, resulting in painful tactile friction. Additionally, the continuous visual dominance of white atmospheric precipitation induces a highly depressing internal metric. I calculate that a summer variable would completely eradicate those negative inputs. Seasonal affective parameters are a perfectly normal biological response, Jessie validated gently, matching her clinical precision. I deeply wish I possessed the capacity to successfully execute that planetary environmental shift for you. Even if I were to acquire a sudden, massive influx of 1 million monetary units, I could not alter the Earth's axis to delete the winter season. Kira turned to face him, the warm ambient lighting reflecting in her irises. She blinked twice, calculating her emotional baseline. Your sustained proximity is the only operational requirement I currently possess, she assured him. I do not require macroenvironmental modifications or monetary influxes as long as you remain my permanent constant. Before Jessie could vocalize his appreciation for her calculated loyalty, the auditory frequencies from the opposite end of the circular tubs spiked. The couple who had just entered were speaking at a volume designed to override the bubbling jets. Did you see that weirdo inside? The man asked, wiping condensation from his forehead. Yeah, the woman replied, wrapping her arms around her submerged knees. He was acting like a giant toddler. He kept turning on that tipping bucket machine that pours into the shallow end and splashing everyone. It was incredibly obnoxious. Jessie immediately recognized the behavioral profile. He shifted his posture again, seamlessly dropping his specialized vocabulary to interface with the median population. Hey, sorry to eavesdrop on you guys, Jessie called out across the steam, his tone casual and remarkably normal. But I actually know that guy. His name is Marco. He just acts like an imbecile most of the time because he thinks making a huge scene is the best way to impress the ladies. The man across the tub let out a short, cynical laugh. Seriously, if you ask me, maturity is the actual way to a woman's heart. Kira processed the man's statement, instantly verifying its logical integrity against her internal algorithms. Your assessment is mathematically sound, Kira stated clearly, projecting her precise voice across the water. Maturity provides a reliable, predictable foundation for continuous operational success. The woman smiled warmly through the steam. I completely agree. I'm Mary, by the way, and this is Doug. Jessie nodded politely. I'm Jessie, and this is Kira. Nice to meet you both, Mary said. We're heading into the main town center tomorrow afternoon to grab a Beaver Tails pastry. Have you guys ever been? Jessie looked at Kira, transferring the conversational authorization to her. Kira evaluated the nutritional and structural input. A customized, Flat dough pastry configuration sounds highly efficient for caloric intake, she confirmed, signaling her approval of the excursion. Jessie smiled and turned back to Doug and Mary, utilizing his standard conversational protocol. They're absolutely great. I've been to this resort a few times before, and I'm always a sucker for the brownie one. What kind of beaver tails do you guys like? I usually go for the strawberry ones myself, Doug replied, leaning back against the stone perimeter. Can't beat the fruit toppings. I like to keep it incredibly simple, Mary added with a soft laugh. Just the plain pastry with a bit of brown sugar and cinnamon. It never disappoints. Kiera's threat detection grid momentarily activated at the prospect of leaving the secure perimeter of the resort. What is the typical median population density at that specific commercial location? She inquired, her hazel eyes locking onto Mary. Are there usually other median individuals occupying the immediate vicinity? Oh, it's pretty quiet around this time of year, Mary answered casually. Even in the peak of summertime, you might only get 2 or 3 people inside the shop at a time. Hearing the low population density, Kiera felt an acute, overwhelming urge to justify her rigorous questioning protocol. Her social camouflage algorithms misaligned, driven by the lingering trauma of her recent institutionalization. I apologize if my inquiry seemed highly illogical, Kiera stated, her vocal delivery becoming rigid and exceedingly formal. A hostile variable, specifically, a mad woman, clandestinely substituted my standard pharmaceutical prescription for a highly concentrated synthetic hallucinogen. As a direct result of that sabotage, my neurological processing experienced a catastrophic sensory breach, and I am currently mandated to meticulously recalibrate my tolerance for unverified human proximity. Silence fell over the hot tub, broken only by the mechanical churning of the hydrotherapy jets. Doug and Mary stared across the water, their polite smiles dissolving into distinct, highly visible expressions of profound pity. Jessie felt the immediate shift in the atmospheric tension. He watched as Kiera's shoulders instantly locked into a defensive posture. Her round hazel eyes dropped to stare fixedly at the turbulent water, analyzing the thermal gradient as a crushing wave of shame washed over her for breaking her social masking and over-explaining her trauma. Jessie leaned in, closing the physical distance until his mouth was mere inches from her ear. He re-engaged his secure communication channel, dropping his volume to a dedicated whisper. Your verbal output was entirely valid, Jessie assured her in precise, absolute terms. You were mathematically perfect exactly as you were previously. You are functioning perfectly in this current operational configuration, and you will always be mathematically perfect to me. The shame evaporated from Kiera's system, overwritten by his unyielding support. She turned her head, briefly closing the distance to press her lips firmly against his in a sweet, grounding kiss. After the kiss successfully recalibrated her baseline, Jessie turned his attention back to the opposite side of the tub, seamlessly switching back to his standard vocabulary. Hey guys, we were planning to stay up as late as we possibly can tonight to enjoy the water, but we'd love to meet up with you at the town tomorrow to grab those pastries. If that's okay with you, of course. Both Doug and Mary nodded their heads enthusiastically, the awkward tension dissipating into the cold air. Absolutely, you're more than welcome to join us, Doug said kindly. Doug proceeded to dictate his cellular contact digits. Jessie retrieved his waterproof device from the edge of the stone perimeter and carefully logged the sequence into his contacts. Once the thermal limits of their exposure were reached, Jessie and Kiera decided to terminate the hydrotherapy session. They carefully exited the steaming tub, the freezing Manitoba wind instantly attacking their wet skin until they retrieved their heavy towels. They walked back through the heavy glass doors, re-entering the humid, highly chlorinated atmosphere of the indoor aquatic room. They navigated the perimeter of the primary pool, maintaining a synchronized, rapid pace toward the locker room corridor. They almost made it to the primary exit without triggering any external friction. But just as they collected their secondary belongings and approached the sliding glass door, the skinny man with the chaotic leopard-colored hair turned away from the tipping bucket. Marco's eyes locked onto his former friend. "Jessie," Marco called out loudly, his voice echoing off the tiled walls. Jessie did not break his stride. Maintaining absolute firewall protocols, Jessie and Kira walked out anyway, stepping firmly into the secure, predictable quiet of the resort hallway.